In a world where the strong prey on the weak, where hunters risk their lives to protect humanity from deadly dungeons, one name rises above them all, Sung Jin-Woo. But his story isn't just about strength, it's about transformation, sacrifice, and an unrelenting will to survive. Once mocked as the world's weakest hunter, Jin-Woo's journey begins in the shadows, with every step pushing him closer to despair. No one believed in him, not even himself. Until one fateful day, trapped in a deadly dungeon, he made a choice that would rewrite his destiny forever. The question is, what would you do if faced with the power to rise above everyone else, but at the cost of everything you know? This is the story of Sung Jin-Woo's rise, from an E-rank nobody to the most powerful hunter the world has ever seen. His enemies feared him, his allies revered him, and his legacy is only beginning. Welcome to Echoes of Manga. Today, we dive into the full saga of solo leveling, a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. Let's begin. Please feel free to adjust the playback speed to 1.25 or 1.5 depending on your preference. The passageway went on and on forever. Mr. Song and other strong hunters had taken the lead. Song had summoned a small flame on top of his palm to illuminate the way forward. Mr. Kim asked him as he walked alongside Song. "We've walked really far, haven't we? Shouldn't we consider the time we need to escape from here as well? How long have we been walking?" Kim looked at his wristwatch. "Around 40 minutes. A gate shuts down completely 1 hour after the boss is killed, so we have a window of 20 minutes left or so. If we can't see the boss in the next 20 minutes, I suggest that we should just give up." "I guess so." Song nodded his head for a while before pointing to his back with his thumb. "Mr. Kim? It's dark out in front, so why don't you position yourself behind me?" Kim stared at Song's flames for a second or two, before he wordlessly pulled out his smartphone and switched on the screen. And then, the passageway got illuminated rather brightly. Song alternated his gaze between his flame and the smartphone, before he too wordlessly began searching for his own phone. The very back of the group was the spot reserved for Sung Jin-Woo, who was injured pretty badly not too long ago, and Hui, who didn't possess any combat skills whatsoever. Jin-Woo scratched the back of his neck. "Pardon me, I'm really sorry." "About what?" "About, dragging you here against your wishes. I'm fine with it, so you don't need to mind me." Jin-Woo cautiously studied Hui's expression. She definitely did not look fine at all. Jin-Woo tilted his head this way and that while trying to read her mood better, before he asked her again, even more cautious than before. "Are you really fine?" That prompted Hui to shift her gaze towards him. "Of course I'm not. Are you of a sane mind? If you were stabbed a couple of inches higher, you'd have a hole in your heart by now. And what about those injuries on your arms and legs? I worked so hard to heal you somehow, yet you wish to throw yourself into yet another dungeon? Plus, you don't even know where we're going to." She spoke so quickly that Jin-Woo felt like his mind was getting numb from hearing her. However, she was right about everything. If it weren't for the presence of the outstanding healer ranked B, Hui, Jin-Woo wouldn't have been able to carry on living unaffected, never mind working as a hunter. It was a small wonder why such high-ranked and hard-to-find healers were valued so greatly within the halls of the association. Wait, now that I think about it, I owe Miss Hui a lot, don't I? Hui was a healer-type hunter, a rarest of the rare breeds. Not only that, she was a genius ranked at B as well. The association always asked her to heal the injured hunters whenever a gate opened up. And whenever Jin-Woo participated in a raid, he'd almost always end up sitting down next to her. "Are you in pain? Please hold on for a little while longer. Haven't I seen you before? By any chance, are you the person from the last time? You're injured again? It's like we're running into each other quite often nowadays, isn't it? You said that your name is Mr. Jin-Woo? Is it going to be all right? Maybe, this life of a hunter doesn't really suit you? You're here again. Show me your arm." "No, not that one. Use bandages on that arm. I meant the other one with the bone fracture." At the moment, it was way past the point of Jin-Woo feeling grateful for everything she had done, and firmly into the territory of him being apologetic for inconveniencing her. When Jin-Woo looked dispirited, Ju-Hui also felt a bit bad about scolding him just now, and her attitude softened up considerably. "You're really sorry?" "Yes, I am." Ju-Hui fell into a deep contemplation for a bit, before she began gazing at him with the corner of her eyes, and her lips slowly arched up. "If you're really sorry, then, how about you buy me dinner sometime?" Now that was a totally unexpected offer. Jin-Woo looked at her with an expression of surprise and found a teasing smile etched on her face like a teenage girl. A teen girl, huh? The truth was, Ju-Hui was still a young girl who had barely entered her 20s. Didn't she say that she'd be 21 next year? If her long hair was replaced with something shorter, and her current attire was swapped out for a school uniform, she'd completely look like high school senior. His wandering mind pictured the image of Ju-Hui in a school uniform, and his face reddened up somewhat. When Jin-Woo hesitated with his answer, Ju-Hui's cheeks began puffing up like a balloon. "What the? You don't want to buy me dinner?" It happened right then. Suddenly, it became quite hectic out in front. "We found it. It's the boss chamber." Jin-Woo and Ju-Hui's gazes automatically shifted to the front, and they saw a huge stone door blocking the passage. Hunters immediately surrounded this door. "What is this? Why is there a door at the end of the cavern? Have we ever encountered a boss chamber with a door before? This is definitely the first time, I'm sure of it. Doesn't this feel strangely dangerous?" Hunters began to express their doubts and fears one at a time. Since their own lives were on the line here, they had to be cautious and meticulous. However, if one were to become too cautious, one would end up failing to grasp the heaven-sent opportunity in the first place. Mr. Song figured this was one such case. "Are you all planning to return empty-handed after coming this far?" Song placed his hands on the door. "If that's what you want, knock yourselves out. I'm pushing ahead, even if it means I'll be going alone." Song was a rank C hunter with 10 years of experience. If it weren't for his age, which was over 60, he'd be making a killing in a big guild by now thanks to his excellent skills. And when a hunter like that voiced his opinion with such confidence, others began to feel less anxious than before. "Wait a minute." A couple of hunters began recalling rumors of dual dungeons. "I heard that there are incredible treasures hidden within dual dungeons." "Yeah, I heard that a certain small to medium guild found a dual dungeon and grew into a large guild almost overnight. Monsters inside a dungeon always possess roughly the similar ranks no matter where they are located, so the hunt itself should not be too difficult. What if there were incredible treasures hidden with the dual dungeon just as the rumors said, and the monsters beyond this door were about the same difficulty as the rank DE creatures they fought until now? I can't let that old man monopolize all the treasure. No freaking way. Postnatal care, the school fee for the firstborn kid, and let's not forget, this month's rent is almost due too. The opinions of the hunters were now on the same page. Jin-Woo too steeled himself. "I can't return home with just a single rank E magic crystal. At a bare minimum, I gotta kill a rank D, no, one more rank E monster. It didn't even have to be a monster too. If it's treasure instead." Treasures or rare loot found in a dungeon would normally be divided equally among all the participants in a raid. It was quite a different way of sharing the rewards where one could only take possession of magic crystals one procured by themselves. If we score big today, then things might improve at home for a while. Jin-Woo nervously swallowed down his saliva. Ju-Hui saw his determined expression and asked him, "Is that how the expression of someone who's a hunter as a hobby looks like?" Jin-Woo shrugged his shoulders. Who'd bet their lives in their main line of profession nowadays? Unless it's a hobby, obviously. Just as a dumbfounded expression formed on Ju-Hui's face, Song pushed the dungeon's door and it creaked open. There must have been some sort of mechanism installed on the heavy-looking door, since the physical strength of a 60-year-old man was enough to easily open it. Slam. Now that the door was wide open, the huge open interior revealed itself. Hunters hurriedly rushed in. "Let's go in as well." Jin-Woo feared that he'd fall behind, so he grasped Ju-Hui's hand and took the lead. Ju-Hui's face reddened slightly as she followed after him. As soon as hunters sat foot inside, flames erupted on the numerous torches packed tightly on the walls all at the same time. Thanks to that, the interior brightened up considerably. What's the heck? The lights came on by themselves? First time seeing a dungeon like this one. Something's different about this place. Hunters cautiously studied their surroundings. The overall atmosphere of the place was similar to that of an ancient temple. Not only that, an old and somewhat decrepit temple, something that might be buried and hidden beneath the ground. Moss and weed could be seen sporadically on the floor, walls, and the ceiling. Several hunters shrunk back and shuddered slightly. It's a bit creepy in here, isn't it? Doesn't it feel like we're being watched by someone? Leaving behind the scared hunters, the 3-4 strongest of the group went in deeper. Don't say something that might jinx us, will ya? Let's end this quickly and go home. The interior was nonsensically huge. The chamber was shaped like a giant dome. It was as large as several Olympic stadiums. The one found in Seoul were put together. No, maybe it was even bigger than that. However, one couldn't help but feel that it was still inadequate. The reason for that was rather obvious. That thing over there? And no freaking way that thing's the boss, right? In the deepest part of the dome, something so logic-defyingly humongous sat on a throne just as big as itself. It was none other than a huge stone statue of a god. Oh my god. Wow. Shocked gasps leaked out from the hunters. The first image popping up in Jin-Woo's head was of the Statue of Liberty in New York. If that statue sat down on a chair, wouldn't it be as big as that statue of the unknown god? Well, Liberty was a woman, while the one sitting on the throne was a dude, though. No, hang on. Maybe it's even bigger than that. Hunters began nervously swallowing their saliva near the foot of the god statue. The taut and heavy apprehension and anxiety were clear to see on their faces as they worried about this statue being the dungeon's boss. However, the statue did not budge an inch. What a fortunate thing that was. Phew. Even Song spat out a sigh of relief. Okay, everyone. Spread out. Now that they found some leeway, hunters split among themselves and began searching around the vicinity. I don't think there's a single monster in here. You think so too? Never mind a monster, I can't even see a single bug, too. The chamber of the stone god statue might have been massive, yet its actual inner structure was on the simpler side. On the walls, countless torches could be found there. And in front of these walls, more stone statues, slightly taller than a human being, stood tall and unmoving. There were lots of them here as well, found at a certain distance from one another. They are all rather beautiful, aren't they? It's like they are works of art, no? Objects held by each of the stone statues were varied and different. Some held weapons, there was one with a book, some carried musical instruments, and even torches. It's as if they are like statues of a holy temple or something. Song finished what Kim wanted to say. Then, Song found something beneath his feet. Isn't this a magic formation? He found a magic formation that he had never seen before located in the middle of this temple. It was then. Excuse me, Mr. Song? A juicy, something's written here. Can you come over here and take a look? One of the hunters discovered a statue that was different from others and called out to Song. Song stopped studying the magic formation and got up from the floor. Other hunters all gathered around the statue Song was headed off to. Only this statue featured a pair of wings and carried a stone slate. What the hunters focused on was the letters carved into this slate. Song took a sweeping look at the slate and muttered to no one in particular. It's rune alphabet? The rune alphabet. Words that could not be found anywhere on Earth, and found only within dungeons. Only the hunters who had awakened the magic-related professions could decipher them. The laws of the Kurtanon Temple. Song read the very first verse. With a deeply nervous face, Jin-Woo listened to the contents of the slate, as read out by Mr. Song. However, someone suddenly tugged at his arm. When he looked back, he spotted Ju-Hui and her deathly pale complexion. Ju-Hui's complexion was incredibly poor. Sung Jin-Woo was deeply taken aback by this sight. What's wrong? Are you ill somewhere? There. Over there. Jin-Woo's eyes followed Ju-Hui's trembling pointing finger. She was pointing at the giant god statue. More specifically, she was pointing at the god statue's face. Jin-Woo could only tilt his head in confusion because it looked pretty much the same as before. Ju-Hui stuttered some words out. You guys. The eyes of the god statue moved towards us. Just now. Pardon me? Jin-Woo looked again several times, but nothing seemed to have changed. There was no visible change to the god statue. I'm sure you've made a mistake. However, it seemed like Ju-Hui didn't hear him. Her head stayed lowered, and as she held onto Jin-Woo's arm, her entire body trembled even harder. Hang on a sec here. Even Jin-Woo picked up on this strange but ominous sensation now. The world was eerily quiet. So much so, it felt just too bizarre. No sounds. Even the sounds of the flames burning on the torches could not be heard anymore. First law. In the meantime, Song's voice continued on as he read the contents of the slate. Worship the god. Second law. Exalt the god. Third law. Prove your piety. Those who do not keep to these laws shall not leave this place alive. It was then. Slam. Everyone was jolted back to their senses at the sudden explosion of noise. What was that? Where did that sudden noise come from? The first person to notice the change in the situation was none other than Jin-Woo. Because his senses were running at full tilt already, he could tell where the noise was coming from right away. The door! The door is closed. As soon as Jin-Woo shouted out, everyone shifted their gazes towards the doorway. The door they left open was now firmly shut close. God d***it. I can't stand this. The hunter who was the first to oppose the idea of continued exploration of the dungeon began spitting out cusses as he took large strides towards the door. I'm going home, so you all can have fun with a boss or treasures or whatever. That hunter glared at Song with an expression that contained all of his dissatisfaction before he spun his head around and angrily grabbed the door handle. It happened. Song's eyes grew extra large. No. But the area above the hunter's neck suddenly vanished. The headless body powerlessly collapsed to the ground. Hunters began screaming their heads off. The stone statue that smashed a human's head apart with a steel mace returned to its original spot next to the door, as if nothing important had happened, its body completely covered in fresh blood. That thing can move? What the hell? Does that mean every statue in here can move too? We gotta fight against these things? I couldn't even see that d***M thing swing the mace, so how can I? Unlike others here, though, Jin-Woo knew the truth. Their troubles only had just begun. Didn't Ju-Hui say it earlier? You guys. The eyes of the god statue moved towards us. Just now. If what she said is true. A chill rapidly ran down his spine. Jin-Woo forced his stiff neck to turn around so he could look behind him. The stone statue of the god was looking down at him. It was then, the god statue's two black eyes changed to red. Was this the instincts of a hunter? No, the instincts of a living being were sending out urgent warning signals. Something was coming. Something none of them could contend with. Jin-Woo turned towards the other hunters and cried out as loudly as he could. Get down. Almost at the same time, red beams of light shot out from the eyes of the god statue. Jin-Woo hugged Ju-Hui and threw their bodies to the floor. Buzz! The beam shot right by the spot Jin-Woo had been standing. 1/10 of a second. No, he survived by 1/100th of a second. That was definitely too close for comfort. Unfortunately, not everyone was as lucky as Jin-Woo. Those who were swallowed up by the red light evaporated where they stood. Only the ashes of what used to be human hunters remained where the beam flew past. The screams came not from the dead hunters, but those who witnessed their final moments from the sidelines, actually. What the fuck was that? You? How can such a thing even be? The remaining hunters began freaking out. Out of the 17 hunters, only 11 survived. Not one of them had ever experienced such a powerful attack before in their lives. I barely made it because he told me to get down. If it wasn't for Mr. Song's shouts. Hunters stared at Jin-Woo while nervously swallowing their saliva. Jin-Woo turned out to be their unlikely savior. Without his timely warning, they could only imagine what would have happened to them, and that thought sent chills down their spines. While still lying prostrate on the ground, Jin-Woo glared at the god statue. Its eyes were still glowing in red, but it did not attack again. Is the attack over? Jin-Woo looked underneath him. The scared silly Lee Ju-hui was trembling in his arms. This was the reason why she worked for the association and not for a big guild, and participated in simple raids like this one, even though she was nominally an excellent hunter with a rank as high as B. Ju-hui's breathing was getting rougher by the second. He couldn't let her be like this. He had to do something. Jin-Woo was about to raise his body up, thinking that he gotta do something here, but then, someone grabbed his shoulders and pushed him back down hard. Don't get up. It was Mr. Song, somehow next to the youth before anyone had noticed it. Jin-Woo was flustered, but still did as he was told. Song then shouted at the other hunters. Nobody move. Stay exactly where you are. Song looked around before focusing on Jin-Woo. Only those that moved got killed. Those who listened to you and got down survived. It seems that way. Song tilted his head slightly. I thought you warned us because you figured something out? No, well, I just felt something dangerous was coming, so... A flash of light brushed past Song's eyes just then. His instincts are pretty good, in other words. He's a ranky hunter? If only his abilities were a bit higher. Just as Song stared at Jin-Woo with a rueful expression, Jin-Woo too found a little bit of leeway to check out the older hunter's condition. And the youth's eyes opened up wider after finding something pretty terrible. Your arm? This is nothing. I can still hold on. But still? Jin-Woo swallowed down his saliva. Song's other hand that wasn't pressing down on Jin-Woo's shoulder, his left arm, was gone. Song studied Ju-hui's conditions for a bit, before he took off the t-shirt he was wearing, and while not even showing the enormous amount of pain he must be feeling, he wrapped up what was left of his left arm. Help me tie up the end, please? It's difficult to sew with only one hand. Jin-Woo could only nod his head then. They were able to somehow stop the bleeding for now. Rather than a scream or a pained moan, Song let out a long sigh. It was a sigh containing 10 years' worth of experience as a hunter. Now that the first aid was over, Song's gaze became a level sharper as he studied his surroundings. Although the god statue stopped attacking them, their situation hadn't improved in the slightest. And like so, seconds continued to tick by. Just why do we have to suffer like this? A few hunters even began shedding tears now. We can't stay like this forever. The patience of the other hunters was running out as well. Jin-Woo agreed with that sentiment, though. Right, we can't stay here forever. But what could he possibly do here? If Song's suspicion was correct, then the moment they moved, they'd get attacked. And even if they got lucky and managed to evade the beams and reach the door, there were the two stone statues guarding the doorway to worry about as well. They were a big problem too, actually. The movements of the doorkeepers were so fast that he couldn't see it with his eyes. Could he or anyone else open the door and escape before those statues attacked them? It sounded completely impossible, which meant that the annihilation of the hunters was just a matter of time. Wait. A matter of time? When his thoughts arrived there, a strong sense of disharmony filled him up. An event that couldn't have happened, but it happened anyway. But no one else seemed to have picked up on it yet. We missed something here. Without a doubt, the answer to their salvation hid in that something. It was then. Don't move. Song shouted at Mr. Ju, who was at the far end of the group. Shut up. Who knows when that thing will start attacking us again? But you want me to stay here and wait? Mr. Ju was a close combat type hunter. These types of hunters possessed far superior physical abilities than regular human beings. On top of this, Ju was about to sign up with a big guild after his skills were acknowledged by them not too long ago as well. I'll not die here today. While keeping low to the ground, Ju put all his strength down to his legs. His aim was at the doorway. The muscles on his legs were swelling up fast. Damn it. Song could only mutter out to himself. Right then, Ju kicked the ground and exploded forward. Meanwhile, Jin-Woo hurriedly turned his head to look at the god statue. Just as he suspected, the eyes of the statue were fixed on the back of Mr. Ju. And then, the chilling red ray shot out from those eyes. Buzz! The beam slammed on the back of Mr. Ju. Kayahawk! The female hunter screamed at the top of her lungs. She must have developed a leak, because a puddle of yellow liquid formed where she was squatting on the ground. The expressions of the hunters froze, hard. Oh my God! Mr. Ju no longer stood where the red beam flew past. Only the pair of ownerless ankles could be seen now. One of the men with a weaker constitution began emptying the contents of his stomach. Jin-Woo's expression also crumpled as well. As expected, the god statue could easily finish them off if it felt like it. It'd be easier than stepping on squirming bugs, actually. If that's the case, then why hadn't it? It could kill them, yet it hadn't done that. This was a completely different pattern of behavior compared to the monsters that attacked as soon as spotting human hunters in their vicinity. These statues only moved if certain conditions were met. The doorkeepers that only attacked if someone approached the door. The eyes of the god statue firing that red beam if someone moved. It was like a game with a set regulation. Hang on. Could there be some kind of rules in this chamber? It was here that a piece of puzzle found its place in Jin-Woo's head. He began recalling the contents of the stone slate Song was reading not too long ago. That was why. The laws of the Kurungon Temple, was it? Regulation was rules, and rules could be laws as well. The key to their safe escape from this chamber had to be buried within those warnings found on the stone slate. Worship the god. That was the first law. Did you just say something? Song shifted his gaze back to Jin-Woo. Instead of a reply, Jin-Woo simply placed his index finger on his lips. It was a sign asking for a bit of time to think. If my thoughts are right? Jin-Woo slowly rose up. Song hurriedly tried to stop the youth, but Jin-Woo shook his head while carrying a determined expression. Doesn't look like he gave up on living. Song nodded his head. Jin-Woo kept his eyes trained squarely at the god statue and carefully stood up. Almost right away, the eyes of the statue were fixed on Jin-Woo. Buzz! And as expected, the red beam was fired in his direction. If he got down to the ground a moment slower, it'd be his face melting away, instead of a few strands of hair on top of his head. Lying face down on the ground, Jin-Woo breathed in and out quite heavily. Jin-Woo shouted out towards the rest of the hunters. Everyone! Their attention shifted towards him in an instant. Jin-Woo spoke as he met their gazes. You must kowtow towards the god statue. Hunters began tilting their heads after hearing him. You want us to kowtow to that statue? Hunters exchanged glances with each other, before loudly cussing out at Jin-Woo. Fuck you! What bullshit are you spewing here? What the hell? How can you say something like that under the current circumstances? Have you lost your mind, Sung Jin-Woo? Kim's face became boiling red as he began snorting like a bull. I had no idea you, Mr. Song, would be like this. If I could move, then I'd have punched you in the face already. Jin-Woo bit on his lower lip. 6 of their comrades were killed by the god statue. So, it was rather obvious that the surviving hunters would cuss him out when he told them to kowtow towards that abominable thing. It wasn't hard to understand what these hunters were feeling at the moment. The most important thing was, he had no logical evidence to back his theory up. He only had his gut feelings. Indeed, that was the only way to describe it. I'll do as you say. That voice came from Jin-Woo's back. Everyone's eyes immediately shifted there. It was Mr. Song, effectively the leader of this group. Mr. Song Ajusi? You are going to kowtow to that F***king statue? Just as other hunters began to freak out, Song looked straight at Jin-Woo. Young man. You've discovered something, haven't you? Jin-Woo resolutely nodded his head. Is it your instinct again? Yes. For the time being. I see. Just now, 11 people survived thanks to Jin-Woo's instincts. Well, with the death of Mr. Ju, there were 10 now, but still, if it was Jin-Woo's instincts, then wouldn't it be worth believing it at least once more? That's what Song thought. When Song knelt down and kowtowed towards the god statue, the mood had become solemn and silent. He's really doing it? Seizing upon this opportunity, Jin-Woo shouted out once more. Everyone, I beg of you. Please kneel before the god statue. We might be able to get out of here alive. Might live. The impact those simple words carried was quite explosive. We might live. We can get out of here? With just one kowtow? The hesitant hunters began to plop down to the ground, as if they were really kowtowing. The number of them performing the act gradually increased. In the end, even the complaining Kim bowed his head towards the statue. However, there was no visible change to the god statue. Indeed, those chilling red lights still shone from the eyes of the statue. Jin-Woo felt his heart go cold. Was I wrong? It was here that his gaze shifted to Ju-Hui next to him. No matter how generous one was, it was difficult to describe her posture of squatting on the ground shivering, while holding her head in her hands as her kowtowing. Jin-Woo carefully grasped Ju-Hui's wrist. She raised her head like a scared cat. Seeing her, Jin-Woo wordlessly nodded his head. Only then did she relax her muscles somewhat. With that, Jin-Woo was able to slowly change her posture. There was only one person remaining now. And that would be him. Jin-Woo knelt down towards the god statue, placed his hands on the ground, and slowly lowered his head. Finally, something began to change. Hunters who had noticed the change first raised their voices. The god statue. Look at the statue. Its eyes. The red light buzzing in its eyes was gradually weakening. What the hell? Is this really going to work? Eventually, the red light completely vanished. Oh! Hunters began rejoicing loudly. The red light is gone. We made it. The excited hunters began standing up one at a time. Even then, the statue didn't fire the red beam. Jin-Woo belatedly raised his head and spat out a sigh of relief. Phew. Just as he suspected, this chamber operated strictly within the set regulations. If that's the case, then this game was far from over. 2 more laws still remained. The second law, exalt the god. And the third law, prove one's piety. It was then. Rumble. Accompanied by a goosebump-inducing noise, the entire chamber began to shake. Jin-Woo's expression hardened immediately. As I thought. His suspicions proved to be correct once more. Things were only getting started. The humongous god statue was slowly rising up from the stone throne. Hunters were hugging each other while shedding tears of joy until then, but when they realized this turn of events, they all froze up like statues themselves. What? What the hell? It wasn't over yet? This can't be. None of them could articulate what they wanted to say. Despair rapidly dyed their expressions. Soon, the god statue completely stood up from the throne. The creature swept its gaze around once, and began walking towards the hunters. Thud! Every time the god statue stepped on the ground, the whole world seemed to shake. Thud! It was so tall that its head was almost scraping against the chamber's indescribably high ceiling. Thud! Even when the hunters were overwhelmed by the statue's sheer size, the thing was gradually closing its distance to them. Mr. Sung. Mr. Sung Jin-Woo. What can we do? The hunters who were cussing at Jin-Woo only a short while ago hurriedly began crowding around him. Is there a way out of this? Say something. All these adults were forming tearful expressions as if they'd start breaking down in sobs and wails very soon. Currently, Jin-Woo was their only hope. Jin-Woo helped the frozen stiff Ju-Hui up from the ground and began talking about the second law. Exalt the god. That's the key. Wait, isn't that? Kim suddenly butted in as if he knew something others didn't. Isn't that what's written on the slate? Correct. Worship the god. Exalt the god. And finally, prove your piety. We need to satisfy all 3 laws. Jin-Woo began speaking faster and faster. The god statue was already a stone's throw away from them. Thud! Everyone's complexion paled as the gigantic shadow loomed over them. Let me try something. A young male hunter who usually kept to himself suddenly took a step forward. What are you trying to do? I've been in a church choir. I'm confident if it's about exalting something. The young hunter slowly stepped forward towards the statue while disregarding the dissuasion of Kim. He regulated his breathing while looking up at the god statue before he took a large gulp of air. I come to you, Lord. His clear voice began reverberating within the chamber. Renew my faith once more. Bless me with your grace, Lord. The statue stopped its march in front of the singing hunter. Oh! Oh! Hunters began gasping out in elation. The god statue didn't move from the spot as if it was absorbed by the singing. All the other noises in the room vanished. Only the young man's voice could be heard in the chamber's interior. The young hunter was encouraged by this and carried on. All the weakness found in me, through your love I shall overcome. Among the hunters, only Jin-Woo was shuddering from this ominous sensation filling him up. This is wrong. Jin-Woo swallowed up his words several times. The chamber featured its own set of rules. But the young hunter was exalting the god statue with the rule of Christianity, not with the rules of this chamber. Thankfully, the statue wasn't moving, but could singing that him qualify as upholding the rules? Jin-Woo shook his head. The only reason why he didn't say anything was solely because he couldn't think of a better way to stop the god statue himself. It was right then. Thud. The weighty noise reverberated throughout the chamber. The female hunter screamed at the top of her lungs. When the stone statue lifted its leg up, bloody mess of what used to be the young hunter could be found on the ground as well as on the bottom of its foot. Other hunters began screaming in panic and shock, too. The face of the statue, emotionless until then, was now crumpled in pure rage. It's angry. Run away. Hunters dispersed away from the statue in a hurry. Unfortunately for the female hunter, she lost her reasoning and stood on the spot while screaming loudly after personally witnessing the death of the young male hunter. Damn it! Jin-Woo was running away while carrying Ju-Hui in his arms, but he turned around so he could go and help that woman out. But then Song stopped the youth. But, Ajusi? It's too late. As if slapping a fly down, the god statue slammed its palm down at the female hunter. Slam! Jin-Woo inadvertently shifted his gaze away. It was a truly gruesome sight and he couldn't bear to watch it unfold. There is no time to waste like this. Are you planning to let this girl die too? Song's words sobered Jin-Woo up in an instant. It was as he said. Thud. Thud. Help me. The statue was not walking around anymore. No, it was actually running around and stepping on the humans it found nearby. Whenever the thing stepped on the ground, the entire chamber shook around hard. Thud. Thud. Jin-Woo gritted his teeth and began running again. Ju-Hui squeezed her eyes shut and held on to him for her dear life. Let's split up. Yes. Thinking that moving around together was dangerous, Jin-Woo and Song ran in separate directions. Jin-Woo made sure to run towards the furthest corner from the frenzied god statue. However, there was another hunter who had arrived there before he did. It was Mr. Park. Park was running with everything he had. Tears formed on the edges of his eyes when he recalled his family. Back home, a son who resembled him so much and a wife pregnant with their second child was waiting for him. He couldn't die here, not like this. Perhaps because he ran with everything he had, he was able to run the furthest away from the statue out of everyone here. Pant. As Park tried to control his heavy breathing in the corner, his friend Kim urgently shouted at him. Mr. Park. Park raised his head after hearing the familiar voice. Yeah. Kim pointed at the spot behind Park and cried out. You're back. Look behind you. It was then something sharp gleamed coldly behind Mr. Park. Slice. Park was sliced in half from the top of his head right down to his groin. His cleanly cut two halves fell to the ground. Park. The stone statue that killed Park with its great sword returned to its position as if nothing had happened, exactly like how the doorkeeper did before. Kim began tearing up after witnessing this scene. You sons of bitches. Thud. Thud. Behind him, the humongous god statue was stepping on and killing humans one at a time, and if you ran towards the corner in order to avoid it, then the stone statues located there would start attacking you. My arm. The interior of the chamber swiftly fell into chaos. Cold sweat dripped down from Jin-Woo's forehead. His legs were getting heavier. His breathing was getting rougher and rougher. However, his head was filled with only one chain of thought. Exalt the god. Exalt the god. Exalt the god. The words of the second law circulated in his brain nonstop. The key to unraveling this mystery definitely existed within this chamber. Something within this chamber that they could use. However, when the hunters first entered this place, they had searched every nook and cranny, but didn't find a single contraption nor things that might be some kind of tools. No, back then or now, the only things here that can move are the stone statues. It was then. A thought raced past Jin-Woo's brain just then. Only things moving in here are the statues? Damn it. Jin-Woo's eyes widened. Why haven't I thought of that before? If the only things that could move were the stone statues, then the only thing he could use had to be them, too. These statues activated when humans got near them, meaning he had to take advantage of this rule. What if? Even though he was running short of breath, Jin-Woo roared out loud enough to shake the entire chamber. Run towards the statues holding musical instruments. All the hunters still alive heard Jin-Woo's voice. Instruments? A ray of hope found its way into the eyes of the hunters. Quite different to back when he told them to kowtow, everyone moved unbelievably quickly. If Jin-Woo was wrong about this, then as soon as arriving near one, they would be killed by the stone statues holding the musical instruments. However, no one here questioned Jin-Woo's words. Song was the first one to arrive in front of a statue carrying a musical instrument. Song controlled his heavy breathing and raised his head to look at the statue. And as if it was a lie, the fingers of the statue moved and strummed on the harp. A beautiful melody flowed out. It's working. Hurry to the statues with instruments. Hunters ran towards the nearest correct statues in hurried footsteps. The statue with a trumpet began blowing it triumphantly, one with a flute began playing with it, the one holding the lyre strummed on its strings. While sensing the approach of his physical limit, Kim somehow arrived in front of the statue that held a bazooka and plopped down to the ground. As soon as the statue began playing the instrument, the god statue stopped chasing after Kim. He must have been overcome with emotions, because Kim then began shedding tears while he stayed down on his knees. Meanwhile, the god statue turned around. The creature searched around and soon enough found its next prey. Jin-Woo spat out a cuss as his gaze met the god statues. He then began running hard, so hard that his heart might explode. His back was already soaked through in sweat. Why? Why isn't it working? Jin-Woo's resentful glare landed on the stone statue in front of him. The statue holding a drum showed no signs of moving at all. Thud! 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 The god statue closed in with frightening speed. He was practically on the other side of the chamber yet the distance between the two shortened in no time at all. Jin-Woo swallowed down his saliva. Could it be that the statue won't play because there are two people here? Me and Miss Ju-Hui? He couldn't think of anything else. Because other statues were playing music just fine as soon as a hunter stood in front of it. There is no time to think anymore. Jin-Woo put Ju-Hui down and got ready to run to somewhere else. Mr. Jin. Still terrified out of her mind, Ju-Hui clung onto Jin-Woo's sleeve. Jin-Woo calmly whispered in her ear, "We'll both die if we stay together." Tears began forming on Ju-Hui's eyes. Her fingers trembled as they held onto his clothes. Unfortunately, there was no time to explain to her in detail. Jin-Woo carefully pried her hand away and began running in the opposite direction as hard as he could. Boom boom boom. When he glanced back, the statue behind Ju-Hui began beating its drum in a slow but steady rhythm. What a relief! There was only one thing remaining now, to run to the other statue without getting killed. Only Jin-Woo hadn't received the protection of the music-playing statues. Quite obviously, the rage of the god statue was solely directed to Jin-Woo and him alone. Jin-Woo did his best to avoid the foot of the thing that rivaled a building in size and crossed the room in a hurry. Thud! He fell and rolled around, but still, he somehow managed to avoid getting flattened by the god statue's foot. He might only have been a rank E, but he was still a close combat type hunter, so his physique came in handy in situations like this. Just a little bit further. A bit more. Jin-Woo kept an eye out on the god statue's movements and ran even harder. His speed increased. And when the distance remaining between him and the stone statue was mere a dozen feet. No, that's the wrong one. Mr. Song cried out to him. Jin-Woo had been paying attention to the god statue only. He was stunned by the shout and hurriedly turned his head to take a look at his front. It's not a statue with an instrument? He belatedly realized that the thing that looked like a musical instrument from afar was actually a shield, instead. And sure enough, the statue mercilessly stabbed down with its shield. Jin-Woo hurriedly threw himself to the side. Ju-Hui screamed. Jin-Woo rolled on the ground, and when he came to a stop, he raised his head to see the god statue standing right in front of his nose. It's one thing after another. His forehead must have been torn from him rolling on the ground, because blood was flowing down and blurred his vision. His view was restricted and he couldn't look too far away. Jin-Woo quickly searched around his vicinity. An instrument. An instrument? However, no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't see a single statue holding an instrument nearby. Meanwhile, the god statue raised its leg over Jin-Woo's position. Thud! Jin-Woo threw himself again and somehow avoided the foot of the statue again. But he had reached his limit. A powerful dizziness was assaulting him, and for some reason, he couldn't even balance himself. Please? If there was a real god, he thought that he'd start praying right about now. It was then Jin-Woo spotted a stone statue that held neither a weapon or a musical instrument. Is that? Jin-Woo decided to bet everything on that statue. He crawled on the ground and arrived in front of the statue in question. He then managed to flip his body around and lie down on the ground so he could see the god statue. He no longer had any energy to move. Jin-Woo stared at the approaching god statue and continued to roughly breathe in and out. The expression of the god statue was far more contorted compared to before, as if it got infuriated further by Jin-Woo's continued evasion. The god statue now stopped in front of Jin-Woo. Seeing a creature as big as a high-rise blocking his entire view, Jin-Woo felt like he couldn't breathe anymore. Did it think he was nothing more than a cornered rat? The god statue simply looked down at him and didn't do anything else. This is the end. Jin-Woo sensed his own unavoidable death approaching closer after looking straight into the eyes of the god statue. From somewhere behind him, a beautiful and otherworldly voice came out. Jin-Woo turned his head around to see what was going on. The lips of the stone statue holding a book moved, and whenever they did, a divine song flowed out and filled the interior of the massive chamber. The crumpled expression of the god statue slowly reverted back to the emotionless state. Soon, all those horrifyingly contorted facial muscles of the statue smoothed out. When the song of the stone statues came to its eventual end, the god statue turned around. Then, just how other stone statues had done until now, it returned to its throne and settled down as if things that happened until now were nothing but a lie. Thud! The noise of the god statue sitting down on the throne resounded throughout the chamber. A thin smile formed on Jin-Woo's lips. Meanwhile, Ju-Hui began running from her position at the far end of the chamber. Mr. Jin-Woo. She ran with all her might and knelt down next to him as tears streamed down on her face. What can I do? What am I supposed to? She summoned all of her magical energy and activated her healing magic. However, nothing seemed to improve. The dispersed hunters gathered around Jin-Woo one by one. Every single one of them carried a dark expression. Mr. Jin-Woo? Even then, only Ju-Hui was crying in sorrow. Why was everyone acting like this? Jin-Woo's lips bobbled up and down. He wanted to ask what was going on, but he couldn't really summon forth his own voice. Sensing that he had no choice, he tried to prop himself up. Then he noticed the pool of blood around his lower torso. Only then did he belatedly realize the change to his body. Below his right knee was gone. Jin-Woo's eyes reflexively shifted toward the stone statue holding the shield. He then saw the trail of blood clearly visible on the end of the shield. And the rest of his right leg was just below that. Drops of blood started falling from Ju-Hui's nose. That was the sign of her reaching the limits of her physical stamina. The healing magic from a rank B healer was unable to recover missing limbs. Meaning, what she was doing was basically pouring water into a broken jug. Her stamina rapidly bottomed out in the end. It's fine now. Miss Ju-Hui. You can stop. I'm going to heal you. I'll fix you as good as new. Hunters stared at the two of them while forming miserable expressions. Out of the 17 who initially entered this chamber, only 6 remained now. And from this group of 6, 2 of them had suffered horrible, grievous wounds. Song had lost his arm, while Jin-Woo lost his leg. They might have survived, but none of them felt like rejoicing at the moment. It was then, yet another strange noise rocked the chamber. Rumble! The middle of the temple, where that strange magic formation could be found, suddenly rose up above the ground. Jin-Woo inwardly thought that it had finally come. Prove your piety, is it? The circular magic formation in the center of the temple began rising up noisily and only stopped after reaching the height of a couple of steps. An altar. Hunters displayed alert reactions as soon as Jin-Woo muttered out. An altar? He just said it's an altar? The person who had rescued them from the two preceding crises was not some high-ranked hunter, but rank E Jin-Woo, who used to be the butt of their jokes most of the time. If it weren't for Mr. Song, all of us would have been. Hunters were thinking this exact same thought. Under the current circumstances, Jin-Woo's words were their lifeline. And now, that Jin-Woo had muttered out a word altar. Kim always was quick on the uptake, and so he caught on to the meaning first before anyone else had the chance to do so. I get it now. I see how it is. Kim then unsheathed the sword hanging on his hips. Now originally, this weapon would be used to cut various monsters down. But for now, it'd have to be utilized for a different purpose altogether. Even if I'm a dumb, I can more or less get what you're trying to say here. Hunters nervously swallowed their saliva while looking at the sharp, coldly gleaming blade. Mr. Kim. Why are you pulling your sword out like that? Why don't we talk about this first? Let's talk first. The highest-ranked member among the group, rank C Hunter Song, was heavily injured, meaning there was no one here that could potentially stop Kim, who boasted a pretty powerful set of skills himself even within the D rank. Kim pointed towards the altar with his sword. The final law, prove your piety. And there's an altar appearing out of nowhere in the middle of this place. Kim's gaze then shifted to Jin-Woo. So, aren't we supposed to offer up a sacrifice? Mr. Song? Jin-Woo slowly nodded his head. That was what the youth thought as well. One of the surviving 6 had to act as a sacrifice. That's what the last law probably meant. Jin-Woo came to this conclusion. He sensed more disturbance and raised his head, and realized that the eyes of Mr. Kim as he approached closer did not look friendly at all. A long sweat drop glided down Jin-Woo's forehead. Ajusi! What? You, young man, don't say anything and be still. Kim angrily shouted out and pointed his sword at Mr. Song, who was squatting next to Jin-Woo in order to check out the youth's condition. Just who was it that dragged us to this place? Wasn't it this guy? Yes, it was Mr. Song. So, don't you think it's only right for Mr. Song to take the ultimate responsibility? Ajusi! Jin-Woo tried to get up in a fit of anger, but then, Song's hand that resembled the bark of an aged tree stopped the youth. Jin-Woo looked at Song in disbelief. Song wordlessly shook his head. His eyes were pleading with Jin-Woo, asking the youth to not say anything else. Of course, Jin-Woo had lots of things to say, but he kept them down for now. Song slowly raised his body up. What Mr. Kim said is right. I should take the blame for today. Old man, I guess we are now finally on the same page. Kim used the tip of his sword to point towards the altar. If you get it now, then let's get going already. Over 10 people died here because of you, old man. One of the dead hunters today happened to be Mr. Park, a personal friend to Mr. Kim. Exploring the dual dungeon was decided with the vote involving everyone, but Kim had already erased that memory off his head after losing much of his reasoning. Mr. Song spoke to Kim. I'd like to walk on my own volition, so can you put the sword away? Of course, Kim refused right away. How can I trust you, old man? Stop wasting time and start moving already. Song sighed softly under his breath and walked towards the altar. Kim pointed his sword at the older man's back and followed on afterwards. Jin-Woo bit his lower lip while watching the two men walk away. This isn't the fault of Mr. Song. More than half of the group agreed to do it together. Just because things had gone south, blaming Song for everything was simply too cowardly, he thought. But Jin-Woo unfortunately did not possess enough strength to stop Kim here. Kim, thought to be one of the best among the rank D, and Sung Jin-Woo, easily the worst of the rank E. The difference in their strengths was all too clear for him to see. Not only that, Jin-Woo had even lost a leg. If he tried to confront Kim as he was now, there was a chance that him and even Ju Hui, who had been focusing solely on healing him, could meet with disaster. Damn it! Jin-Woo squeezed his eyes shut. He never hated his own powerlessness as much as he did today. In the meantime, Song had stepped up on the raised altar. Suddenly, a red flame lit up near the outer perimeter of the altar as soon as he did. Everyone nervously swallowed their saliva and observed the unfolding situation carefully. However, nothing else happened. Just a single flame came to life, and that was it. They waited for a while, but there was no visible change at all. Not only Kim, but everyone else got flustered by this situation. Kim quickly turned his head and spoke to Jin-Woo. "Look here, Mr. Song. This wasn't it?" Jin-Woo also shook his head. "Even I?" He too thought that once a person chosen as the sacrifice stepped up on the altar, the third law of prove one's piety would be completed. It's not about offering up a sacrifice? If so, then it was not necessarily bad news. If the law was not about sacrifices, then it meant Mr. Song could still saved. Jin-Woo's expression brightened somewhat. He sweated bucketloads as he tried to stand up, and two hunters nearby quickly lent their assistance. "Please take me closer to the altar so I can study it. Mr. Jin-Woo, your injuries are?" Ju-Hui also got up from her spot to follow after Jin-Woo. Her complexion was rather pale after expending too much of her magical energy. But because she had worked so hard, Jin-Woo's blood loss had been temporarily halted and the pain he felt was reduced to a barely noticeable degree. "I gotta hurry up." The current condition of Ju-Hui, Kim's boiling rage, Song's injuries, and the frightened hunters, he didn't have a lot of time here. Jin-Woo eventually arrived at the altar with the help from other hunters. "Let's climb up on the altar." The two hunters flinched from his statement, but they trusted Jin-Woo and stepped up. Then 3 more flames lit up. Right away, Jin-Woo's eyes gleamed brightly. "It's the same number as the people on the altar? Mr. Song and Jin-Woo, plus 2 others who helped the youth." Indeed, the flames lit up to match the number of people standing on the altar. And it kind of looked like that these 4 flames were drawing a circle outside the altar. If I take into consideration the space between the flames, 2 more will complete the circle. It seemed that all the remaining people had to climb up on the altar for something, anything, to get started. Jin-Woo turned his head to ask Song, "If we wait here, do you think other hunters will come to rescue us?" Song shook his head. "Today is the 7th day since the gate showed up. These things will start moving first before the help arrives. Because it's a gate ranked D, I see that it's been left alone for far too long." "Well, that's how the association operates, isn't it? A gate would open up fully after the 7th day. The real meaning of a raid was to kill the dungeon's boss monster and therefore close the gate before that happened. When failing to do so, the monsters trapped in the dungeons would be set free from the dungeon and they would be able to roam the outside world." Jin-Woo looked behind him. The giant god statue was still looking down on them with an overbearing, arrogant expression from its throne. If that thing manages to go outside, then the ensuing chaos would be unimaginable. Of course, before that happened, hunters coming to this chamber to rescue them would all be killed by the statues first. He was now sure of the fact that they could not wait here forever. Jin-Woo called out to Ju-Hui and Kim. "Both of you climb up." Ju-Hui stepped up on the altar first. The hesitant Kim also followed soon afterwards. 2 more flames lit up and the circle was now complete. And then, hunters were grandly stunned by what happened next. "What the hell? What's going on here?" As Jin-Woo had suspected, yet another change took place. "It's coming." From the outermost edge of the altar, small blue flames floated upwards and began drawing a circle of their own as well. There looked to be at least 30 of these blue flames, placed real tightly next to each other. 34, 35, 36. Jin-Woo quickly counted them all as the blue flames completed the circle, and he realized that there were 36 of them. The 6 red flames that lit up to match the number of people, and the 36 blue flames that appeared outside them. What could be the significance behind that number? It was then, without a warning, the resolutely shut door suddenly opened up wide. Hunters reflexively flinched. They all wanted so bad to run towards the wide-open doorway, But having seen the final moments of the choir boy hunter, they found it hard to take the first step. If one tried to be the first, just who knew what might happen to them? Everyone's gaze fixed on Jin-Woo as if to demand an answer from him. However, Jin-Woo's lips remained tightly shut. He couldn't come up with a guess at the moment. He didn't know whether the open door was a trap, or they were now allowed to go out after they upheld the final law successfully. Too bad for him. Just as everyone was looking at Jin-Woo, a horrifying noise filled up the entire chamber. The heads of all 6 hunters quickly snapped around to look. What was that? It's coming closer. Those damn things are all moving now. Hunters' breathing quickened in an instant. The stone statues that had only moved when a person got near were now several steps closer to the group. Jin-Woo only needed a short moment to figure out what happened, of course. No, the statues didn't move. It's the plinths below them that moved. That horrifying screech from earlier on most likely came from the plinths beneath the statues grating against the stone floor. They are not moving anymore? Kim wiped the droplets of sweat on his forehead as he spoke. While everyone was still staring at the statues, Jin-Woo's focus was on the blue flames. They had been going out one by one, and 3 of them had flickered out of existence already. Hearing that screech, someone cried out. What was that? Where did it come from? Jin-Woo quickly raised his head. The noise had come from his general direction. The stone statues facing him had moved a little bit closer. Why only my side? Was it because he looked at somewhere else briefly? In order to confirm, Jin-Woo closed his eyes. The noise resounded out again. As soon as he opened his eyes, the noise stopped. What the F***ck is going on here? What are we supposed to do about this? Jin-Woo quickly shouted at others. Don't take your eyes off the statues, no matter what. When he thought about it, he realized that the statues first began moving closer to the group when others were busy looking at him. They creep closer when we are not looking at them. It was right then, another blue flame disappeared. However, there was still no discernible change to either the group or the statues. Could it be? Cautiously raising his arm, Jin-Woo did his best not to take his eyes off the statues while checking the time with his wristwatch. As I thought, at an interval of 1 minute, a blue flame was being extinguished. The blue flames are the timer. It was quite likely that one of the main points of the 3rd law was to stay within the altar until all 36 blue flames died out. In other words, as long as everyone was keeping close watch on the statues, they'd be safe. It was quite possible that no one had to die at this final huddle. Wanting to be more accurate about the remaining time, Jin-Woo began recounting the number of blue flames once more. There are 30 remaining. They only needed to endure 30 more minutes. Unfortunately, Jin-Woo made a huge mistake, just then. While he was counting the number of blue flames, his eyes wandered away for a brief moment, and that resulted in the statues creeping closer. The man standing on the opposite side screamed and ran towards the door. He simply couldn't hold on any longer as the horrifying screeching noise coming from his back frightened him so much. As soon as he left the altar, one of the red flames disappeared. No! Jin-Woo cried out urgently. However, the man running as if he had gone crazy escaped through the open doorway without meeting a grisly fate, which took everyone by surprise. What the hell? Mr. Sung, what's going on? That guy made it out alive. Kim shouted out, flustered. Jin-Woo was standing with his back to the doorway so he couldn't really tell what was going on. Did something change? The door. The door has closed just a little. The door's closing? No. After that guy left, the door moved a little bit, but then stopped. Jin-Woo then recalled one of the red flames disappearing as soon as that man left the altar. God damn it. He immediately felt his heart go cold. One of the questions that he couldn't quite figure out until now as he stood on top of this altar finally had an answer. How could standing on an altar be a proof of one's piety? Indeed, he now had the answer to this quandary. And that answer was probably the worst one for Jin-Woo, who had only one leg now and needed others' help just to keep his balance. That open doorway was a trap. A false hope right in front of one's eyes. If people saw the open door and climbed off the altar at the same time, the red flames would have gone out and the doorway would be closed shut again. And then, the banquet of raining blood and screams would inevitably follow next. On the other hand, the altar was the proverbial promised land. If each one did what they had to do in their positions until the timer ran out, then their survival would be guaranteed. So, it was between the false hope right in front of one's eyes, or the unseen promise of salvation. The third law was a test to see if one could defend one's position without falling into the sweet temptation over yonder while constantly being under the encroaching threat of death. However, two flies in the ointment happened in this situation. The first one was Jin-Woo. Originally, the remaining group of people would have ran straight for the open door, but they stopped first to listen to what Jin-Woo had to say, and that helped them avoid the trap being sprung in the first place. We got lucky there. Indeed, that had to be the only explanation. Such a thing was only possible because Jin-Woo managed to figure out the first two laws all by himself and earned the trust of others. Unfortunately for him, the second fly also happened, something he didn't foresee. A deserter had appeared among their midst. How would human beings react when there was a hope of survival right in front of their eyes? It was way too obvious. The man helping Jin-Woo up abandoned the youth and bolted as well. Song hurriedly reached out and propped Jin-Woo up from his back. When that man left the altar, yet another red flame disappeared, and as expected, the door closed a little bit more. Ha! Kim dazedly pointed at the second deserter, but just like the first person to abandon them, he too safely escaped past the doorway. Jin-Woo confirmed the number of remaining red flames and shouted out, "We must not move. Any more than this, then it'll be the end." We will finish this chapter here. Next chapter will be out soon, so stay tuned.